On the one hand, you got your presumption of grace and your peace, love, and understanding. On the other hand, you got the smack in the chat. Weigh them. They're not equal. Please don't put smack in the chat. Thank you for joining here on the two-way platform. We have great guests, great topics, great news, interesting news. Some of it's great. And we're delighted to have you be part of the two-way community. So thank you for being here. This program will run the normal way. We'll talk about the events of the day with our great guests, and then we'll bring you in. If you're here on the two-way platform and you want to ask a question, raise your hand. If you're new, tonight's the night. Political pundit Rod Stewart said, please raise your hand. It'd be long if you're watching on X or YouTube. Don't raise your hand and don't put smack in the chat. Thank you. Our guest tonight, Eliana Johnson, the editor of the Washington Free Beacon, who's been here before and is a genius and love having her on always. And then I couldn't be more delighted. Erick Erickson, who is a radio host and blogger and just a deep thinker who and a believer in morality and the importance of imbuing public policy decisions with a concern for the planet and our children and our grandchildren, and just writes with such authority because he's not afraid to say the truth. It's an incredible honor to have him here, and he'll be here in a minute. Our two main topics are going to be, once again, following the bouncing ball of the president's trip. We'll show you some more highlights of these just extraordinary photo ops, which, again, if you've ever been involved in presidential advance and you look at how they're executing these, very impressive. And President talked a little bit. We'll play you that. No huge news. Spoiler alert. No huge news from the trip, but interesting pictures, and he said some interesting things. And then we're going to talk more about this issue of the media and the Democratic Party not taking the opportunity to grapple with their credibility deficit over the way they covered not just a presidential candidate, but a president of the United States with manifest mental decline that you didn't need inside sources to see or know about, that the American people saw about, and that the two groups of people who were in denial about it, the media and the Democrats, ironically stayed in denial about it to help Joe Biden win. And ironically, they helped Donald Trump. They helped Joe Biden win. Ironically, they helped Donald Trump win. And now they're using this new book to suggest they are being honest about what happened, and they're not. And part of why I'm so glad that Eliana and Erick are here is they speak again with clarity about this. They're not people of the left. They're no supporters of Joe Biden, but they're speaking truth about what happened and what it means and how dangerous it is for a country and how deleterious it is to the interest, ironically, of the media and the Democrats. So we're going to have a full conversation about that. And again, one of the things I've said is this criticism to reflect the views of truth and tens of millions of people should not just come from the right. It should come from people in the media like me who are nonpartisan. But there's some people on the right, like our two guests tonight, who, again, you'll appreciate the clarity with which they speak about this, with no satisfaction. All right, maybe a small degree of satisfaction, but no major satisfaction. That's not what they're in this for. They see the truth. And what's so frustrating to people on the right, not just about the Joe Biden cover-up story involving the Democrats and the media, but about the last maybe 5 decades of liberal media bias, where they have to talk to their friends in the establishment press who say, "Oh no, there's no bias here. Our bias is for good stories, or our bias is for holding the the public interest." It's so frustrating for those of us, whether we're on the right or not, and I'm not. I'm a nonpartisan journalist. It's so frustrating for us. This is so obvious. The 50 years of liberal media bias is as obvious as Joe Biden's cognitive decline, and yet you've got people who, to this day, at the major legacy organizations, oh no, there was no cover up, there was no bias. And again, it's almost impossible to explain to someone who doesn't see it clearly. There are people on this platform who understand exactly what I'm talking about, and there are people on this platform who say, "What about Don and Erick's business dealings in the Middle East? What about Donald Trump's shaky hand when he held that glass of water?" I'm all for scrutinizing Donald Trump, promise you. But I'll say again, if you want a Democratic Party and a dominant media with the credibility to scrutinize Donald Trump and to hold him accountable, you need to reckon with what happened when Joe Biden was president. Biggest media scandal in the history of the country, and an extraordinary lack of honesty on the part of the Democratic Party. I'll say again, it's one thing to put someone up for the presidency who's got severe acuity decline. He was commander in chief. And after he resigned, and this never gets enough emphasis, after he resigned, I'm not resigned. After he said he wasn't going to run to be the nominee, go look at the legacy media and see how often did they ask the credible and important question, how could he still be commander in chief? If Joe Biden gave up the nomination, which is his whole life being president, obviously a question at least should be asked. We demand to talk to his doctor. We demand to know if he's had tests for Parkinson's. We demand to know how he's being treated for what obvious decline. They didn't ask any of those questions. Incredible story and interesting story to me. And this new book, instead of spurring a truthful debate, is spurring a phony debate about who in the White House covered it up. Anyway, we'll talk about all that. I'm going to talk about, we'll get back to the book and this important conversation and the president's trip. But let me tell you about a few other things that happened today quickly, also in the news. Capitol Hill, it's still the coverage, as we said before. Capitol Hill Press Corps covers big pieces of legislation, regardless of party, as if it's doomed, the whole thing. Everything, every single member who says I might not vote for it is treated like a nail in the coffin. I still think the reconciliation bill will pass, but things are a little choppy right now, or chippy, depending on which word you like. This is the president's national economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, number 9, saying, do not fear, the big, beautiful bill will be signed into law.
It's going to pass the House, it's going to pass the Senate, and it's going to create an economic boom unlike anything that we've ever seen. You know, the budget hawks are a little bit antsy about, oh, this costs too much. But the CBO score that they're basing all of that on is only 2.1% near-term growth and 1.8% growth in the long term. I'm highly confident, as we were in 2017, that you're going to get at least 3% growth. If we get 3% growth out of this bill, Larry, we just did the numbers you asked us to, it increases revenues over the next 10 years by more than $4 trillion. Wow. That is by more than the cost of this bill.
Wow.
See, so this is a bill that pays for itself with 3% growth.
All right, take it back where Kevin's smiling a little bit more. First of all, I've said this before, 3% growth is the whole thing. The doomsayers and the establishment economists on the left and the right who say America can't grow by more than 2%. It's got to get to 3 or higher. And I love Kevin Hassett's optimism. I also love how smiley he always is. I saw somebody put that in the chat. Whereas Larry Kudlow, who previously had Kevin's job and Trump won, less of a smiley guy these days. I don't know why. But Kevin is always optimistic, and we'll see. But I can tell you right now, there are not the votes to pass it, but I still believe there will be eventually. Walmart announced today that they're going to raise their prices, number 10, because of the tariffs. And I can tell you that Walmart, like the other big box retailers, do not want to do this. And they've worked very hard to avoid having to announce this. They know attributing it to the tariffs risks the wrath of the White House, but like the other big boxers, they've been in constant contact with the administration. But they're under enormous pressure. The way their business works, everyday low prices is part of the brand, and so they get no comfort out of this. But we'll see if the pause and on and off tariffs. We'll see if that comes out in the wash here. But that's not good news for anybody. All right, Wall Street Journal, and we'll talk to Eric about this because it's in his backyard or front yard. Wall Street Journal number 12 says that the president personally convinced Marjorie Taylor Greene not to run for Senate. That seat against Ossoff, the right Republican, could beat Ossoff in Georgia. Governor Kemp isn't running now. It appears that Marjorie Taylor Greene also not running means it's open probably for a House member, or maybe, as this story suggests, remind me her name, Noah, a woman who was senator for a while, very wealthy.
Kelly Loeffler. Kelly Loeffler.
Kelly Loeffler. No, not Kelly. It's not. Is it Loeffler? Is that her name?
I think it's Loeffler.
Eric, is that her name? Eric, thumbs up. Is that her name? Kelly Loeffler? Is that her name? No, it's not that. That's not her name. It's close to that. Anyway, Eric will help us with that. Supreme Court today heard
Kelly Loeffler. Loeffler.
No, that's not it. It's not it. Eric's shaking his head. It's not. I'll know when I hear it. I just blanking on her name. Very tall, thin woman. Her husband owns the New York Stock Exchange. I just blanking.
That is her name.
Anyway,
I'm telling you.
All right, Eric will tell us. Stand by. All right. The Supreme Court today heard arguments in this case that has 2 issues. This is number 13, Sam. One is, can district court judges issue a national injunction? So one district court judge can say, you can't do X anymore, Mr. President, and no one in the country can do X, not just in the district in which that judge sits. This is an interesting constitutional issue. There are lots of scholars and lots of people who've served in the White House who say this is nuts. One district court judge cannot be as powerful as the president of the United States. And so that was one thing that was the issue. The other thing that was the issue was Donald Trump's view that birthright citizenship shouldn't be allowed, and that he can say to people, maybe even people who were born here already, not just in the future, you're not a citizen, even though you were born on U.S. soil if your parents weren't citizens. I'm not a big fan, sometimes at least, of interpreting how the Supreme Court's going to go based on the oral arguments. But in this case, everybody was unanimous that the birthright citizenship piece, the justices seem very cool on the notion that Donald Trump can change what has been a long-standing and consistent interpretation of the Constitution. But they seem much more open to the notion that district court judges should at least have some limits on their capacity to make the law of the entire United States. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. All right. I think that's it for other news. So now, first of all, to solve this problem of the question of that lady's name, let's bring in our two guests. Erick Erickson, welcome to Two Way. So happy to have you here. Honored you'd make time. What's that lady's name?
Leffler, not Loeffler.
Leffler. All right, Leffler. And do you think this guy Brian Jack, who's a House member, who's very close to Donald Trump, pretty much if Trump endorses in the primary, right, that person will be the nominee?
More likely than not, and that's the guy that Donald Trump has been pushing.
Yeah. So my guess is it'll be him. That'd be my guess.
Yeah, we'll see. A brand new House member. I'm not sure if he wants to run. If the president pushes him, he will. But he'd been working very hard to get Marjorie Taylor Greene not to run.
Yeah. Eliana Johnson, welcome in.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back. It means your previous experiences here were not a deterrent to a return.
Definitely not. Thanks for having me.
All right. One other story I want to mention before we talk about first the president's trip and then this issue of Joe Biden and the cover-up is a story you all just have now on the you call it the beacon, right? It's called the Free Beacon, but insiders would say, hey,
either is fine.
Yeah. News story you have up about a beat that you all have been very aggressive about Harvard and its relationship with the administration, Trump administration, to cut additional, I'll round that up, $500 million in grants to Harvard, citing Free Beacon report. So the administration is relying on your previous reporting related to Harvard's conduct to say we're going to cut more. Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Sure. And these are recent reports that have come out, in the past 2 or 3 weeks. One of which involves documents that the Free Beacon obtained showing that the Harvard Law Review discriminates racially, gender, sexual orientation, uses these criteria when it both selects members who's going to be on the law review and when it decides which authors to publish. And those documents included editors weighing in on an author's race as a negative, saying, well, this author is white. That's listed in the negative category in terms of whether to publish an article. And I think the crux of this issue will be, is the Harvard Law Review independent of Harvard? I think it's clearly not. The second was a report, and this is a story that really has not gone beyond the Beacon, but is an important story, I think. The 2 Harvard students, one a graduate student, the other a law student, were charged criminally, while Harvard imposed no consequences on these students for accosting an Israeli classmate of theirs during a protest. And there was video of the event as it occurred. So Harvard said nothing, did nothing about this, but prosecutors in Massachusetts took up the case. And the case recently came to a close with the students agreeing to a pretrial settlement where they agreed to do 80 hours of community service and to attend anger management. So Harvard has said nothing. However, one of the students who was an editor of the Harvard Law Review continues to be featured on Harvard Law School's website and was awarded by a panel that included Harvard faculty a $65,000 fellowship that will fund his work with CARE out in California next year, by Harvard Law Review and, Harvard University.
Right.
So we can read between the lines what what Harvard's views on the students are. I should say separately, just to pull back on this, because like we're in the weeds on this at the Beacon. I think the view emerging, and the New York Times did cover this, is that Harvard is getting a lot of plaudits for fighting the administration. But I think what you're seeing, as I just read today in the Times, there's a new civil rights investigation into Harvard for its admissions.
Right.
That comes on the heels of a different investigation over its faculty hiring. There are just too many ways for the federal government to mess with a major research university for Harvard to emerge from this unscathed, even if it prevails in this lawsuit. Like, they're
Right.
in real trouble.
Let me ask you one question, and then I want to talk about the president's trip. There's analogous to me, my confusion about the Harvard cutting off the 450 billion, million or billion, million, not billion, million.
450 million on the
Yeah,
heels of
yeah.
9 billion.
9 billion. Okay. Is like when I hear, well, maybe we'll impose more economic sanctions against Russia. Like, why don't we have all the economic sanctions already in place? And the same here, like, why is the administration just cut it all off based on the previous disputes? Why is there more money that's not been cut off?
It's a really good question. I actually think these guys came into office, and there are people who are, I'm 40 years old, like I believe these guys are younger than I am. In some cases, they're people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, who are going through what are the grants that are given to Harvard, and they continue to find new things. But these
Right.
aren't people with like deep bench of expertise that in one fell swoop on the second day in office knew all the levers at their disposal. I think
Got
this is
it.
a constant topic of conversation within the administration and then various departments in the administration.
Got it. Okay. Let's talk about the president's trip. And I'm going to ask you, for Eric first, your overall views. And while we do, we're going to roll some pictures from today, more great, incredible photo ops. And the first one's going to be the president arriving at a palace where people are waving both flags and furry things. You'll like the pictures. Eric, what are your overall impressions of both the imagery of the trip and the substance of the trip?
He goes back to the first Trump administration. If there was a world that was just and could separate the politics of it, Donald Trump probably should have gotten a Nobel Peace Prize for the Abraham Accord to begin with.
Yeah. You can kill the audio, Sam. Just roll the pictures.
I mean, it's a great trip. It doesn't matter if anything substantively gets accomplished, although there are some business deals coming out of it. The visual contrast between him doing this trip versus how Joe Biden treated the Saudis, who then started coddling the Chinese because of Biden's treatment. It's restoration. I grew up in the Middle East in Dubai. They're very pro-America there. To see the president going back there, even with the difficulties with Qatar, it's actually a big deal for the president to take this tour of the Middle East as his first major trip.
Eliana, what are your impressions of the trip?
A really consequential trip. First of all, one impression is that I don't think it's mattered not having the wire services cover this trip. They aren't there. But the other is that these Gulf states seem to really know how to deal with this president, which is through making deals with him. And they're dealing with him in visuals. Like, there's a real sense of grandeur in all of this. And that is how to deal with Donald Trump. They want to make a deal, and they are setting a template, I think, for the rest of the world in terms of here's how business is done with Donald Trump and this administration. Separately,
yeah. Hold on.
policy.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah, go ahead.
speaking of grandeur, look at the size of that chandelier.
Exactly.
That's incredible. Sorry, keep going.
But that's the type of thing that like he'll come back to the States and talk about and leave an impression on him. And by the way, he mentioned in his foreign policy speech, which didn't get a ton of coverage over here, but I think was pretty consequential, when he said, all of these amazing towers in Riyadh and this beautiful architecture. It wasn't neocons who wanted to remake the world who did this. It was you people over here.
Yeah.
And he sort of used it as a case against intervention. He called it interventionalist foreign policy, but against sort of more muscular American engagement or interventionism on the world stage.
Yeah, I just one more picture coming up. This is in a moment going to be the world's tallest building, which is in Dubai, and it's lit up to look like an American flag. That's another great picture from the trip. The Michael Deaver and me just can't believe how extraordinarily well choreographed this all is. All right, let's move now to the other topic. And again, if you want to be in on the conversation on the Biden book or the president or anything else for our two great guests, please raise your hand. We'll get to you all in a minute. So. I want to get your appraisal again, 80,000 feet, Eric. Again, you first of this moment where there's so much attention on a book that doesn't have very much news in it, but is being seen as exposing the cover up, which is just laid at the feet of the Biden White House, not other Democrats for the most part, and not the media. What's your impression of this moment? And how those two institutions, the media and the Democrats, are rising to the occasion to do what's right and to have everyone who was at fault accountable.
Look, Alex Thompson is one of the reporters who the Biden White House didn't particularly care for because he was pretty consistent. Jake has come out now and said that he should have covered it more. A lot of conservatives very upset with him for the coverage he did give it and the dismissiveness sometimes of the coverage. But the bottom line, the book, I haven't read it yet. I apparently have a copy coming tomorrow, an embargo copy, but I don't think it's going to answer the big question, which in my mind is, how is it that 70% of Americans going back to 2021 had concerns about Joe Biden's mental capacity and the media did not and routinely dismissed anyone who suggested there were problems? How is it the American people could know without White House sources and the media now says, well, our sources weren't telling us, so we didn't know?
Yeah, Eliana, this is the way Eric framed it. If you haven't read the piece Eric wrote today about this, please do. Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor, one of the anecdotes in the book was claimed the president didn't know Jake's name. Jake was at an event today. We'll play the sound bites in just a minute. But this is the thing. Reporters ask Democrats, did you know? Did you meet with the president in private? That's not the right question because you didn't need secret sources or private meetings to know the president had mental decline. So why is it the media keeps asking these Democrats if they saw it? Why aren't they saying, you did see it? How could you not have said anything?
Well, their reputations right now depend on the idea that there was a secret story that was dependent on.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you say they, do you mean the Democrats or the media?
No, I mean the media's reputation now depends on the idea that getting this story depended on being in the room with Joe Biden and seeing something and then coming out and telling reporters about it. And, they just didn't tell us that thing until after the election. I did a little research before this. I was looking back at the Beacon. We started doing a weekly video series, Biden Senior Moments, back in July of 2022. And in the first week, in that week, Biden had read off the teleprompter, repeat the line. He had read his own prompts off the teleprompter.
Yeah.
And factcheck.org came in and fact-checked our video, saying that this was wrong. And who did they cite in saying that this was factually inaccurate? The White House press office.
Right.
So this was like the template of how the media worked.
But here's what I don't get, and then we'll play Jake Sullivan. I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is true, but this is not a case of like even Biden Inc., in which the media did the same thing. They would not accept any evidence that the president's family cashed in. They found every excuse to say no. But this is different because this time the American people saw with their own eyes. So reporters can say we couldn't get at the story because the sources wouldn't talk, but it makes no sense. There's no reason why 75% of the country saw it, and the reporters, as Eric wrote this morning, they were like the only ones who couldn't see it. It just doesn't make any sense. I can't think of an analog, which is why I say it's the biggest media scandal in the country. I can't think of an analog for this. So let's look at Jake Sullivan. Two sound bites. First is number 7, where he's asked to address the accusation that, and he knows the president very well, President Biden, that the President Biden called him Steve.
The accusation is not that he could never perform well, is that it was that he couldn't do it all the time, that he was only able to function well for a few hours in the day, that he would have moments of forgetfulness, there's actually an excerpt in the book where it says he forgot your name in December 2022.
All right, stop just for 1 second. Stop for 1 second. Sorry.
That happened.
So before we get to the question of remembering Jake's name, accusations that he couldn't remember things, accusations that he could only work during part of the day. These aren't accusations, they're documented facts. He forgot things in public regularly, and we know from his public schedule that he only worked during part of the day. And now maybe he was in the office, doing rigorous things, but we know that's not true. So I don't understand how someone from Politico, who writes their flagship morning newsletter today, this is not 4 years ago during the height of the cover-up. Today, he's deeming these things accusations. I don't understand it.
We all saw Biden in front of a
Yeah.
huge crowd. He forgot Mayorkas's name, and
Yeah.
Mayorkas is standing right there, and he stood there slacked up.
Now, people forget names and mix up names. I do it all the time. But I would not address a dead congresswoman at an event in honor of the dead congresswoman and ask her if she was there. That's not forgetting a name. So I say again, why is this guy saying they're accusations? Keep rolling the tape, Sam, please.
I do not recall that ever happening. And I will tell you, Joe Biden knows my name. He knows my name like I talk to him even now. So I was surprised to read that in the book. But what I will more generally say is I had to wake the president up in the middle of the night when there were crises. I had to go into him at various points when unexpected things happened, and surely plenty of unexpected things happened during the time that he was in office and that I was in the seat. I did that over the course of the 4 years, and I saw him operating, decision-making, executing as commander-in-chief throughout that time.
You never witnessed this thing that all these aides are talking about to these journalists, that sometimes he would just sort of fade away. You never witnessed that.
I could just tell you my own personal experience. I cannot speak on behalf of aides, unnamed people, and I can't speak on behalf of what folks reacted to when they saw him operating in public. All I can do is tell you my experience with him, and that's what I've done.
Again, don't say, did you see it in private? I bet he did, and he's not being honest. That would be my guess. And I have a great respect for him, but they're all of the same piece. But that's not the question. The question is, when you saw the president in public, often, clearly having suffered severe mental acuity, why didn't you say something? Did you say something? Did you go to the first family and say, we got to do something about this? This is sending a horrible signal to people around the world. He's not going to win the election. He's not doing his job the way. That's what I don't get. Now, one more, and then I want you all to react to this category of Democrat. Forget the press's ridiculousness. This category of Democrat who's claiming they never saw it. Number 8, please.
What happened in that debate was a shock to me. I think it was a shock to everybody. And I've made that point before.
Stop it there. Again, I say this regularly. There's 2 categories of people. There are people who pretend that it was a shock, and people like all of us who say, well, no, I mean, he might have done better because he has good days and bad days, but how anyone could call that performance a shock, not based on his seeing it in private. Seeing Joe Biden, a man as president who addresses a dead congresswoman, you can't be shocked that in a nighttime debate that he would have that performance. Keep playing.
Finally, do you think, in retrospect, given everything that's happened and everything we've talked about today, it was a mistake for President Biden to try to run again?
One of the things about being National Security Advisor is that you're mercifully insulated from politics and political decision making. I was insulated from it to the point where, while I was National Security Advisor, my spouse was running for Congress, and I had strict rules about what I could even do to support my spouse, let alone be involved in political decision making, political calls in the White House. So I have not weighed in on those issues and would not weigh in on those issues.
Okay. Again, I don't mean to pick on the British man who writes for Politico, but Eric, how could the question be, was it a mistake for him to try to run again? Who could say anything but, of course it was a mistake? I mean, there's no ambiguity. Of course it was a mistake.
I'm still hung up on Jake Sullivan is so insulated from politics. His wife is running from Congress, and they're not having conversations about the voters who clearly had a concern about Joe Biden.
Hillary's campaign manager doesn't have a
although it is the case, Eric, she was never asked about it during the campaign. That's amazingly.
True. And in fairness to Jake Sullivan, I mean, a week before October 7th, he had also never seen the Middle East as peaceful as it was. So Jake clearly had a hard time seeing things around the world, not just in the White House.
What do you think of this category? Is people around Joe Biden? It's also congressional Democrats.
This is all CYA stuff. They're trying to cover their butts for their future political careers because they do know there's a level of accountability coming. Democratic base voters are now furious because they not only feel like they were played, but remember, Joe Biden stood with the Marines behind him and the red lights in Philadelphia and said, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And I was one of the guys at the time saying, if he's really a threat to democracy, maybe you should step aside. And the Democrats were saying, no, he's the only thing that stands between us and Donald Trump. Well, apparently not. It was a play on the Democratic base, not just on the American public, but on the base of Democratic Party. And all these people knew it was coming and refused to do anything about it.
Eliana, if the New York Times said, we'll donate $100 million to the Beacon if you act as a consultant for 1 month and tell us how we can come clean and restore our credibility on the story of how we covered Joe Biden's loss of decline, how this newsroom covered it, what would you do during that month to bring that story out?
That's a great question. Before that, just one thought. You know, I listened to Jake. It's like, I don't expect honesty from Jake Sullivan or Joe Biden's aides or these,
that's their job to lie.
Mandarins of the Democratic Party. Yeah, like they are political actors. What I think the reason we focus on the media, as navel gazing as it is that like their job is something different, and they didn't do it. They acted like Jake Sullivan and Ron Clay and all these other people, and like
totally agree.
Okay. But like I don't begrudge Jake loyalty to the guy he was supposed to be loyal to. So if the Times said we'll donate to the Beacon and you be a consultant, like I have a piece up right now. Like you got to go through the pieces they wrote and the authors of those pieces and ask them like, how did these things happen? So the one I have in front of me right now is how misleading videos are trailing Biden as he battles age doubts.
Right.
And who were the authors on that piece? I can tell you right now, these people will pay no consequences for having written that piece. Who was the editor who assigned it? Do interviews with them. They'll all get promoted, just like the people who wrote 51 intel officers say, Hunter laptop is Russia hoax.
Right.
Because there are no consequences for being wrong when it hurts the right.
You're 100% correct in terms of what's likely to happen.
But then the pieces that weren't written, you got to ask.
Right.
Did you guys what did you really think, and why didn't you write that? And Mark, you've been like focused on Tapper's role in all this, and I got me thinking.
As an example, he's an example.
Right, but there is a way that he could do this, and it would actually be interesting to hear from him. Like, honestly, the intro to the book. Why one of you guys covered this? One of you didn't. What was the real experience of covering it? I don't think it was very pleasant for Alex, who's I don't want to ruin his reputation, but a longtime friend.
Yeah.
And then from Jake, why weren't you aggressive about this? And what are the real reasons? Let's get some on CNN, and then him to say, look, I am a Democrat. I vote for Democrats. It turned out to be humiliating. And now I want the damn story, and I'm out to get the story.
I've been talking about Jake because he wrote the book and because CNN is amongst the most egregious offenders of negligence. But it applies to the New York Times and lots of other places. Eric, just 1 second. I want to get you back in. But let me just make one point. That's what should happen. And I know you say it's not going to, they'll suffer no consequences, et cetera. I'm trying to create a national moment where somebody does this and leads the way. Jake's colleague, Brian Stelter, who Eric wrote about this morning and who I think could be literally the main offender in this dynamic. Jake's got to be accountable for his colleague at his news organization who came on his show and other CNN shows and attacked Republicans for talking about the truth. That's got to be part of the accountability. You can't just be accountable personally. If you worked in a place and platformed people who not just didn't cover Biden's decline, but attacked people for covering it, you got to be held accountable. Eric.
Just a couple of quick points. One, whenever a Republican goes on CNN, they have to account for was the election stolen or not in 2020.
Every time.
I think they said in the past. Brian Stelter in particular and Oliver Darcy, when he was at CNN, had a routine habit during the first Trump administration of playing Fox News' clips of the day, showing how CNN and MSNBC were covering topics that Fox News avoided. Where's the accountability for Joe Scarborough, who I'm friends with, for his F you if you can't handle the truth? This is the best Joe Biden, sharpest Joe Biden ever. just a month before the CNN debate. Where's the accountability for MSNBC giving Jen Psaki a TV show where she used her platform to be dismissive of Joe Biden's concerns? Where is the accountability for Brian Stelter, who's now regularly back at CNN covering this stuff with his obsession with Fox News, where on election night 2024, he was doting on the fairness and balance of MSNBC and how they were covering the election. Is he ever going to hold them to the standard he held Fox News? Of course not. He's not. But I actually believe a free country needs a free press, and we don't have a free press. They're actually captive to their hostility to the right. And they view everything now through the January 6th lens. And I don't mean to make people mad. I don't mean to be intentionally provocative. But I think a 4 to 5 year conspiracy of the media and Democrats collaborating to protect a man who was not ready for a 3 a.m. phone call in a crisis is actually worse than what happened on January 6th, because it was a 5-year divestment of the Democratic role of the president to appointees with no political accountability, many of whom, like Jake Sullivan, can't even be called to Congress to be questioned because of executive immunity.
Okay. I want to say 3 things. Thank you for that. And I want to bring folks in. So again, if you want in on the conversation, please raise your hand. Number 1, Eric and Eliana have been so articulate in explaining this. And if you're a Democrat and you're watching this, you say, well, these are right wingers. These are MAGA red meat people. Don't judge what they're saying based on their political affiliation or their orientation, because what they're saying should be coming out of the mouth of every journalist in America. Every journalist in America should be saying what they're saying. It's not partisan. It's objective fact what they're saying. Now, some people disagree with Eric about January 6th, but the characterization of what the media did and why it is so deleterious to the interests of my business is just factual. So please listen to what they're saying. Please credit what they're saying. Don't, if you're in the blue America, don't say, well, don't listen to them because they're in the other tribe. Number 2, Joe Scarborough is my friend too, and I will tell you, I think he's got an explanation for what he said, and he's done it a little bit, but I wouldn't put that in the same category as the other stuff, and Joe can speak for himself. Lastly, those 2 media reporters for CNN are the reason I say they're maybe the main offenders. Their job is to cover the media and expose errors and flaws in what the media does. They're not political reporters. Their beat is to do this. And they did the opposite of what they should have done in this case. They allied with the Democratic Party and Jake Tapper to protect Joe Biden, to keep Donald Trump from winning. And ironically, and we hear it on this platform all the time, they helped Donald Trump because people could see with their own eyes how outrageous it was. Some independents, some Democrats voted for Donald Trump. And the reason they cite is the cover-up of the Democratic media was so egregious, they couldn't possibly vote for the candidate of the Democratic media left. All right. Thank you both again. Loved what you said. Super important. Kelly, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Snap that in your mouth, whatever it is.
Sorry.
We didn't see it happen. All good. Thank you for good. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind for Eliana Johnson and Eric.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm from Rochester, New York. I was actually on the other day too, and the Biden topic came up. But I wanted to kind of got 2 points, but they're all connected. So Dan, the other day on the morning show, he asked one of the callers at the end, what would you like the Democrats to do? I tweeted at him my answer, but maybe I don't have the reach. So I was thinking about that because, Mark, you're talking a lot about the media, and I kind of feel like the media's, well, their numbers are going down. Eventually they may take care of themselves, but I had a thought about, like, if you were a Democrat, like one of these people that clearly we saw the cognitive decline, it was covered up. It happened, right? Wouldn't you be smart to be one of the first to come out publicly and say, and I don't mean like, I'm so sick of hearing like the media is blaming the White House, right? The White House, you know, all this finger pointing, but like, just own it, like take the L, own it.
Ro Khanna is one of the few people who've done it, and he's a very smart person. So you might be onto something that the smarter a Democrat is, the more likely they are to maybe own it.
Okay. But I also like, I want to hear a little bit about, you know, maybe they don't have to go into too much detail, but okay, what we all saw, what you all saw, and you got to earn some trust back.
Yeah. Eliana, comment on either the media or the Democrats and what they could do now to try to repair the damage that they caused.
Mark, I think you've laid out the questions pretty capably that the Democratic Party should be grappling with, that seems like they're pretty far away from grappling with. The media, you know, remember in 2016 when Trump won, like Dean Baquet announced some huge, like, we got to grapple with this. What did we get wrong? That seems to have been a total failure. But I do think, like, some prominent journalists who feel like we missed this, hearing like some honest reckoning with why did we miss this? How did we miss this? Would be quite interesting and would actually be useful organizationally.
Yeah.
And then some top newsroom editors. I mean, I have heard secondhand that at various outlets reporting on Biden's age and related issues was prohibited here or frowned upon there. And so I think some, some internal reporting, like if the mainstream media was more competitive when it came to reporting on each other, which they're not very on this issue, even though they're supposed to be competitors, but like some real reckoning with this, as opposed to, oh, I was there and we all did it and we all did talk about it,
Right.
would be pretty useful.
Yeah. Eric, Georgia's a great case study for a lot of stuff. You've got two senators who are far to the left of people I thought would ever be elected senator in Georgia, and they're both there. Senator Ossoff's up for re-election. Do you think this issue of the credibility of the Democratic Party could hurt him in the general election in this race?
Yeah, so John Ossoff has problems to begin with general trust. Black farmers in South Georgia feel like he's too Atlanta focused. Frankly, he's a very nice person, but he's also very introverted. That doesn't help him on the campaign trail. He's also, to the left of the state, culturally, socially, fiscally. All these things are going to drag you down. You tie it then into Joe Biden, he'll have some past in that he was new on the job to some degree, but still, he was a guy who prided himself on being an investigative journalist. He didn't have a spidey sense go off.
Right. So you may not know just because you live there, but has Ossoff talked about Joe Biden's mental acuity?
No.
Not been asked, of course. Kelly, thank you for. Go ahead.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yeah,
Don't
of course.
think this like perfectly highlights like how these politicians get a reputation of entitlement and hypocrisy. If the average American, did things like this at their job or in their like relationships at home, they'd have consequences.
This is why I say it is unprecedented, biggest scandal, media scandal in American history. If a doctor did her job as poorly as the press did on this, I mean, it's hard to imagine the scale of damage. And again, they've done damage to my business. They've not done damage to Donald Trump. They helped him win. That's the irony of the whole thing and the sadness. Kelly, thank you. Grateful to you. All right, David Porter, if you tell me you're not going to crash, I'll bring you in. Tell folks where's point A and point B on this drive, and after you unmute carefully, what's on your mind? At least you're wearing your seatbelt.
Carefully, I'm in a Tesla, so it's driving itself as long as I'm looking forward. Going from Salem to Lincoln City. I saw you guys in, what was that, DC?
Yes, sir.
Anyway, love the show. I'm such a fan. Election night was your election night.
David, unfortunately, we're having a little trouble. David, we're having a little trouble hearing you. So I'm gonna mute you, and if you get to a safe place, we'll bring you back. I apologize, but the signal on as it too often the case on our highways, for whatever reason, we haven't solved that technological issue. James, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are after you unmute where you are. Who makes those incredible glasses and what's on your mind?
The incredible glasses are the 2 for a special price at Costco.
All right, I'm glad to hear that.
Great deal. I'm from.
They're gorgeous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is the most common adjective when referring to me. So I'm West Hartford, Connecticut. Been on before, and actually, I had my sister-in-law got on at my advice, and you sent her an email, which was very nice, and she came on and asked questions.
Awesome.
I want to throw a quick shout out to Erick Erickson. Everybody should subscribe to his Substack.
100%.
Fabulous.
100%.
Yeah, I guess my question, Mark, and for anyone is, like, what are the long-term consequences of the actions of the media around not covering what clearly is was a problem for our country to be forgetting about politics it's just, they like, if the nuclear call comes, is less than 5 minutes to deal with it.
Yeah.
So like, I'm wondering, what are the long-term consequences with respect to polarization, the media itself in its battle with alternative media and mainstream media, and lastly with sort of the Democrats sort of structure.
James, that's a briefly phrased question that amounts to, in a good response, 3 PhD theses. Very complicated stuff, but let's do our best. Eliana, what do you think the implications are? And I'll just say it's very hard to disentangle that from the lack of coverage of Biden Inc., the general hostility to Republicans, the long-term decline of the media, separate from this for business and other reasons. But Eliana, do your best on that very big topic.
Sure. I mean, I don't think the ideological bias of the media is at all irrelevant. Yes, there are business considerations, but Mark, you just said like this is bad for my business, and my thought was, well, this all has been very good for your business, because I think the ideological homogeneity of the media has opened up this huge lane for people who are making a real genuine effort to play it straight, and that they are increasingly irrelevant. They're writing to each other and for each other. And I mean, what's repeatedly come across to me, being at an outlet that has a pretty small audience, but an outsized impact for the audience that it has, is that they are not covering the most important issues in American life, and they're leaving huge white spaces for lots of other people to do that. And look, they didn't cover the Biden age issue. Did it really matter? Like, no, the American people knew.
Right.
We're in an environment where the information gets out there. They weren't on the higher education beat for years and years and years. I still remember at one point a prominent Politico reporter mocking the Beacon, which has been covering this issue for the past 4 years for Who Cares About Harvard. Well, now it's the biggest story in the country, or one of the biggest stories in the country. So I think they are increasingly irrelevant. And do they know it? I mean, I was saying they should write these self-reflective essays. I'm not actually sure they're capable of that kind of self-reflection, but it's just opened up huge opportunities for other people, and they don't write stories, and they don't really matter.
Yeah, Eric, I think, although I talked about the longer term trends, and this is in some ways of a piece, part of why I'm so passionate about this is I really do think this is a watershed, and the credibility of my business is so important. So as best you can, address some of the big issues James raised.
Yeah, just let me throw names at you. How long this problem is and how it's gotten worse to this tipping point. Go back to the Obama administration. Jay Carney went from Time to Vice President Biden's shop to White House press secretary. He was replaced in Vice President Biden's shop by Shyla Murray from the Washington Post.
Wall Street Journal. And the Journal also.
Worked for the Wall Street Journal, who eventually went to work for a left-wing outlet. Linda Douglas went from ABC News to the Obama administration. Jill Zuckman went from the Chicago Tribune to the Transportation Department. Doug France went from the Washington Post to the State Department. Stephen Barr from the Washington Post to Obama's Labor Department. The amount of people who went from the press into the Obama administration and did the same for the Biden administration, and you rarely see that happen with conservatives, other than Trump hiring half of Fox News to be cabinet secretaries. Now, it's anomalous. The fact that members of the media don't recognize it, and to a degree, they're very much like Harvard University in this level of insulation and how they hire, and until they're willing to recognize they have a problem, because it's not that they're on the right or on the left, it's that they don't treat the claims of the right with the same legitimacy. When I was at CNN for 3 years, I never once talked about a story that originated at the Free Beacon or a conservative site, but repeatedly had to cover stories that were from Talking Points Memo, the Daily Kos. That's where they originated. The level of editorial bias in the media is actually a bigger problem than the reporter bias, because the editors and producers are the ones shaping these stories. And if they're not fixed, people are going to go more to the YouTube channels of their preference. One more point here. Go back to you, Mark. Back in the day, and when the Note started, and I was an obsessive political junkie. Everybody could read the note and find out what was going on in politics in the world, on the campaign trail, the Gang of 1,000. And I, as a young guy in politics, I loved it. Nowadays, when you read, Politico's morning email, you have to wonder who's the guy who wrote it this morning and how long before he gets a job at MSNBC. Guys on the right can't trust the media. Women on the right can't. And even people on the left now are being fed through a prism that shades to the left, and they can't get the whole truth.
Yeah, James, thank you. Grateful to you. Just reminded of something because we talked about Jake Tapper again. I'm not putting all this on Jake's shoulders because there's lots of other people, but he's the one who's written a book claiming that he's uncovering this. Yesterday, he put on some of the Wall Street Journal reporters who wrote one of the few good pieces. And I say with respect, it's a little bit overrated. They really didn't get very much of the story. They got some of it. He had them on. He called them heroes. He said these reporters were heroes, associating himself with, like his co-author, some of the few reporters who during the campaign tried to write stories about President Biden's mental acuity decline. Oliver Darcy, who you mentioned, Eric, at the time was writing CNN's media newsletter. Do you know what he said about the Wall Street Journal story after it came out? It mostly interviewed Republicans, the Journal story, talking about the president's mental acuity decline. He said, the Wall Street Journal owes its readers and the public better. The Journal story has, quote, glaring problems. Same news organization, not that much later. Now they're heroes, according to CNN. A year ago, they wrote a story that failed their readers and had glaring problems. Donald Trump needs a lot of scrutiny. The Qatari plane, the budget, the business dealings, the money that he's making from crypto deserves a ton of scrutiny. And what I'm saying, I keep repeating it. If you care about those things and think they need scrutiny, you need a strong press that's trusted, not a press corps that one day says the Wall Street Journal has failed, and then when it's in their interest, say they're heroes. That's my view. All right, Sue, welcome in. Those of you who don't know, Sue lives in Colorado, and she used to be a Democrat, and now less so. Sue, thank you for joining. What's on your mind?
Mark, quick question for you. You interviewed Michael Bennett the other day, and I wondered if you still think that he is someone who will run for president. And number two question, in general, when you look at some of the Democrats, and comes to mind Pete Buttigieg, because you had mentioned the other day that, he looked like he was doing the 10 things that one needs to do to run. Yep. Okay, so when you look at him, he was in the cabinet. Are Democrats like Pete Buttigieg going to pay a price with people like me who are insisting that the Democrats come clean about their gaslighting? So those are my two questions.
Well, if you're asking me if he's going to pay a price with people like you, I'll start by asking you.
I love Pete Buttigieg.
But is he going to pay a price with you for not coming clean?
Depends on what he says.
Yeah.
And if he's actually electable, to me, that's one of the biggest.
Yeah, he came cleanish in Iowa on this issue.
Right.
He went a little further than most. I'm gonna ask Eric and Eliana to talk about Pete Buttigieg. I asked Michael Bennett if I should take him off my list, and he said basically he's not going to run for president. I still think he might, but despite what he said, and I still think I don't read the chat, but I glance at it. He's boring, etc. I really do. I've covered a lot of these. I really do think if Michael ran again, and he ran once before, and that can help to learn stuff, I really do think he'd be quite a strong candidate, despite what he said about the prospect that he'll run. And I'll continue to think that because of the quality of his mind. No, not perfect, but as Bill Clinton said famously, if you want a perfect candidate, vote for someone else. Eric, what do you think about Pete Buttigieg in general as a potential nominee, and regarding how he's handling this question that Democrats are now dawning on them they're going to have to address?
The problem for Buttigieg when he runs in 2028 is that he was one of the people who even got ahead of Kamala Harris in coming out to defend Joe Biden in 2024 before he dropped out, and insisted on being one of the attack dogs, had media favorable coverage that he was going to be the aggressive defender of Joe Biden. He's going to have to answer for that stuff. I personally don't find him a strong candidate. I mean, I am biased. I am a Republican. But I go back to him on the campaign trail in South Carolina in 2020. How does a gay man from Indiana who moves to Michigan run in 2028 and get through black voters in South Carolina who rejected him, not because he was gay, contrary to a lot of that, although it showed up in the polling, it was a problem for black voters in South Carolina, but because he does have this habit of saying odd things, like a few weeks ago, the discounted adoption on babies of color, or my personal favorite is when he was on the campaign trail in 2020 in South Carolina, instead of talking about dark money, referred to black money. Those histories of foibles will come up, and couple them to the defense of Joe Biden on the campaign trail in 2024. I honestly do think that any cabinet member from the Biden administration, and Kamala Harris, if she runs in 2028, is going to be weighed down by these stories and the anger of the Democratic base of the cover-up.
Eliana.
On Buttigieg, I tend to think that candidates of his mold, and they exist on the left and the right, Bobby Jindal was kind of from this mold, who are Ivy League educated, especially Harvard educated, but could be Yale or Princeton, and McKinsey consultant types who seem perfect on paper and very compelling, do not translate to the national stage because they just have nothing in common with the average person. And of course, we've had presidents who've gone to gone to Ivy League schools, but they tend to come from much more interesting, they tend to have had much more interesting childhoods, a la Barack Obama, and George W. Bush. They tend to have been like outsider insiders, not insider insiders. So I just don't think Buttigieg is going to resonate. As for Bennett,
You can say
I
I'm a
don't know.
knucklehead. Don't hold back.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're more on track to nominate President AOC than Michael Bennett.
I had the privilege in 2020 of going to see Joe Biden talk at a HBCU in Raleigh, boring as hell. Amy Klobuchar, very small event, very high on policy, and then Pete Buttigieg at another rally, and it was absolutely electric. People stood in line in freezing weather to get in. It was phenomenal. Next day, he drops out. I sat there in 2020 and said, do I go with my mind? Do I go with my heart? I don't want Bernie, so I had nobody else but Joe Biden to vote for in 2020. But I just think he was absolutely electric. Really,
yeah, he's a gifted man. He's a gifted guy. Sue, thank you for coming in. Very grateful to you. I'm very grateful to both you, Eric, and you, Eliana, for coming on, and I hope you'll both come back regularly. I just love having you on, and as I'll say again, because we're going to put the clips out, don't look at their bios and say, well, I don't have anything to learn from them because they're of the right. They're speaking so clearly with intellectual and moral clarity about a huge problem that this country went through that could have had cataclysmic implications. And if you care about Donald Trump being held accountable, you should listen to what they're saying about what the press has done, not just regarding President Biden's acuity, but the long-term forfeiting of credibility by just being biased. It's and so many people denying it. Still, now's the time to not deny it. It's to admit it and to investigate yourself and to come clean. Eric and Eliana, thank you both. Really grateful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me tell you about a few things coming up in 2 minutes here on or on Michael Moynihan's channel, I should say, on Two-Way. Michael Moynihan's show that he taped earlier in the week. So you can't ask questions, but you can watch Michael. And I urge you to watch. If you haven't sampled the Moynihan Report, please do tonight in just 1 minute. Joshua Citarella, Doom Scroll host. Please watch that. You can also right now, as you can listen to my podcast or watch it on YouTube. Next up, interview my discussion about these issues involving the credibility of the media and the Biden acuity. My conversation with Meghan McCain and her telling the story of how when she refused to endorse Joe Biden in 2020 for president, she was frozen out of the Biden world because of the style of politics that they practice. And finally, my conversation with Charlie Kirk. We talk about why we both think Rush Limbaugh was such an incredible communicator. We talk about whether MAGA is going to mobilize on behalf of reconciliation, which they haven't done yet. And we talk about Charlie's reaction if Kamala Harris invited him to have dinner, how he would react to that, amongst other things. So please go to Next Up Halperin on YouTube, or go to where you get your podcasts. Again, it's available now, both the video format and the audio. And in a few hours, I'll be back with you on the morning meeting. Sean is off tomorrow. We've got a surprise guest host, so tune in if you want to see Dan and myself and someone else sitting in for Sean. And this program will be back tomorrow night. I'm going to the Knicks game tomorrow, and I'll be doing the show from somewhere near Madison Square Garden. And since usually when I ask for something on the program, someone offers it up. If you've got an office with a quiet room and Wi-Fi I can use near Madison Square Garden tomorrow night from 6 to 7, I need to come at about 5:30. Please send me a message. I need a space to do the show from tomorrow night so I can go right to the game after. Thank you for watching again. Thanks so much to Erick and Eliana, and thank you for raising your hands, those of you who did, and I will see you shortly. Have a good night.